Oh, well, good morning, everyone. It's time to start the first leg of the trip. It is very early on Tuesday morning. It's a little before 4 a.m., and I'm having to start this trip the way that I least enjoy starting. That's a lot of light. Ugh. The way I least enjoy starting a trip, which is to say really early in the morning. But the timing is such that this is how it's got to go. So I got everything ready last night. All I have to do is just get in the car and drive. So that's what we're going to do. Now, there won't be anything to see for the first few hours because it'll be dark. When the sun comes up, maybe I can switch the camera on and let you see at least a little part of the journey. But for the next few hours, there's just not going to be anything to see. So let's get moving and make our way toward Canton, Ohio. I'm stopped for gas just outside of St. Louis, so I'll be driving through St. Louis. My thought was I should get gas before going through the major city because I don't know how much gas I'm going to use going through the city. It'll really depend on traffic. So if I get gas before, then I'll be able to make it through the city and probably not have to get gas again until the next major city, which I believe is Indianapolis. I think that's going to be the next stop after St. Louis. So let's keep going. Don't want to stay here too long. I got to keep moving if I want to make good time. Let's get back on the road. Have sort of a theme for part of this trip. I wanted to discuss football, more specifically American football, and I'd like to start by addressing all of the non-Americans, especially of the European and or British persuasion. I think most Americans are aware that what we call football is not the same thing you call football, and I think most Americans are aware that what we call soccer is not called soccer in most other places. So it seems to me, especially a lot of British people, feel it very important to point that out. And if that makes you feel better, certainly go right ahead. But I don't think you're telling anyone anything that isn't already known. I also don't think that most Americans are particularly bothered by the fact that football for the rest of the world is not especially popular in the United States, and American football is not really popular anywhere else. I don't think most Americans really care. However, I will say that soccer, what we call soccer, is gaining popularity in the United States with professional leagues, with youth leagues. It is improving, and it is gaining a foothold in the United States. Will it ever surpass American football in popularity? No, never. But it is improving, and soccer is not unknown to most Americans. A lot of American kids play soccer. It's a very popular sport for younger kids because it's a lot safer than American football. A lot of American moms would much rather their children play soccer than American football. It's just a lot less dangerous, and there are a lot fewer injuries. So, yes, it's very popular with American kids. And when I was a child, I played soccer. My kids, especially my oldest child, played soccer when she was younger. So we know your version of football. It's very familiar for most Americans. I will also address one other thing that is a common misconception of our American football around the world. That is rugby with pads and helmets. It is not rugby with pads and helmets. American football does take a lot from rugby. It borrows some rules from rugby. It borrows just a lot of just general gameplay from rugby, but it is not rugby. And the pads and helmets are not worn for the purpose of keeping people from getting hurt or preventing injury. In fact, they don't do that. People get hurt very frequently, and there are frequent injuries, many times severe injuries. The purpose of the helmets and the pads are to keep people from getting killed. And that's why they were introduced in the first place, because before the helmets and the pads, there were frequent football deaths in America. To the point that people were considering banning the sport as simply being too violent, too dangerous. So the pads and the helmets were introduced as a compromise, so we could keep the sport, but have fewer deaths. And it has done that, at least. There are now fewer football deaths because of the helmets and the pads. But there's another consequence of the helmets and the pads, and that is the sport is played at full speed. American football is not a contact sport, it is a collision sport. It involves violent collisions, and this is a subtle difference between American football and rugby. There are big hits in rugby. In fact, you can see big hits in rugby in YouTube videos if you want to look them up, and they are spectacular, and people make those hits without pads or helmets. But it's not at the frequency and to the degree that happens in American football. Rugby tends to favor proper tackles, which it happens in American football as well. However, the general rules of the game and the strategy of the game in American football often favors hitting over tackling. The way the game is structured, with the players in the positions that they take at the start of a play, it often creates space between players, which allows them to pick up speed, to run full tilt, and to collide into each other at full force. It's violent, it's dangerous, it frequently results in serious injuries. And this is why people can't play it for a long time. Their careers in American football are generally pretty short. And if you had the frequency of collisions and the force of collisions in rugby, you would have the same problem in rugby as they had in American football, which is that people would die. And then you'd have to do the same thing to rugby that happened in American football. You'd have to decide, are you going to reduce the violence of the sport, or are you going to put in some safety measures to keep people from dying? So here we have it. We have a sport that is extremely violent, that involves collisions that are the equivalent of a car crash. The human body is not designed to withstand the kind of forces that the sport puts on it. And I think, well, the damage that it causes, the long-term damage that it causes, it stretches far beyond what happens on the field. Because of the head trauma, the concussions, which can cause long-term brain damage. I think if you're going to play American football, probably the best thing for your health is if you do not make it to the professional level, that you get some kind of injury to your leg or your ankle or your elbow or something when you're playing at a lower level, high school or football, so that you don't advance. That way at least, you know, you can play, you can enjoy the time, enjoy the sport, but you're not exposed to the repeated blows to the head that will occur if you continue to play the sport over more years. And the more you advance in the sport, going to college, going to the pros, the bigger the guys are, and the more powerful, and the more dangerous. So if you want to do it, it's probably safer to do it at a lower level and then move on, hopefully with an injury that you can live with before it gets to a point that that your life is negatively affected. But that brings us to the next point, and that is the long-term damage that the sport causes. The results of repeated concussions are being more understood now, thanks to better science. And it produces long-term effects that destroy people's lives. And the way the sport is structured, there may be no way around it. They are changing the rules here and there. They're designing better helmets and all of this, better pads, and that's great, but will that eliminate the long-term brain damage that occurs? Probably not. The reality is there's probably no safe way to play the sport. So that raises the question, can you morally support the sport of American football? Is it a moral thing to do to perpetuate this kind of violence that results in long-term damage to people? And the answer is maybe not. You can counter that all participants volunteer to participate. So by volunteering to participate, they accept the risks. And that is true. However, the kind of risks that they're taking are not the kind of risks that anyone can reasonably consent to. This is not just the risk of injury on the field. It's the risk of brain damage that causes depression, suicide, violent tendencies that can alter your personality in the course of your life. And can a person reasonably give informed consent to those kind of risks? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that is reasonable. If consent is not enough to mitigate the moral questions about the sport and the risks the players are taking to play the sport, can we go on supporting it? And this is something I've struggled with. The answer is probably no. Periodically, I have walked away from the sport because of that. But I keep coming back because, damn it, I love the sport so much. American football is what I would call a guilty pleasure. The term guilty pleasure gets tossed around about things that really shouldn't be. People say they have a guilty pleasure when they enjoy a movie or a TV show or some other form of entertainment that most people don't like or think is in bad taste. But that shouldn't be you shouldn't feel guilty about enjoying those things. Your personal taste does not have to conform to the mainstream. Enjoying some movie that a lot of other people think is not very good, there's no guilt involved in that. The only thing that should be a guilty pleasure should be something that could be morally reprehensible. A guilty pleasure is something that you take pleasure in, but also should feel guilty about. And American football, I think, fits in that category. A real guilty pleasure. It is a pleasure. I love it. I enjoy it. It's amazing. But it's also problematic. And to understand the sport is to understand that some guilt should be felt about enjoying it. Now, having given that speech, let's go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame and a football game. I hope you enjoy it. If it is arguably immoral to support American football, and I admit it is a guilty pleasure, why do I? Why do I like it so much? Well, I've been aware of football since I was a child. I think every American kid is aware of it. You can't avoid it. It's just everywhere. But I didn't understand anything about it, and I didn't really care about it. The only thing that I knew about football was that the grown-ups watched it a lot, and in the region where I grew up, there were a lot of Dallas Cowboys games on TV, so there are a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans around. So I saw a lot of the Dallas Cowboys. It was just there. And at one point my parents even got me a Dallas Cowboys football helmet, like a little plastic one for kids. And I liked it, but I never really played football. I never really had any interest in playing football. I would watch it sometimes, but for me, as a kid, it was nothing more than a bunch of large people colliding with each other and occasionally throwing and catching a ball. Not a lot of appeal. However, at the time, Dallas had a quarterback named Danny White, and he wore number 11. For some reason, I got fixated on that number. So when I played soccer, when I was a little older, briefly played, I selected number 11. I decided to wear jersey number 11 because of Danny White. I didn't have any special connection to Danny White or the Dallas Cowboys, but it was the only athlete's jersey number that I was really aware of, so I chose 11. And on the very few occasions where I played organized sports, I would always choose number 11. It was just my number. Fast forward a few decades and I'm an adult, and I still have no interest in football. But I read an article on Slate.com that described some of the complexities of American football and compared it to chess. Well, chess was something that I did like. I liked chess a lot. And seeing football in terms of a chess match kind of opened my eyes a bit to the complexities of the game. So I read a bit more about it. I watched a little bit of it, and I learned that the sport wasn't just a bunch of large people colliding with each other and occasionally throwing and catching a ball. There are patterns, there are strategies, there are tactics, and that was appealing to me. And the more I watched it, the more I started to see the patterns and even predict the patterns. It really grew on me. I learned to really love the sport. So I was a general football fan for a while, not really following any team in particular. I did go to a couple Dallas Cowboys games, mainly because it's not too far away, and I could get tickets relatively cheaply. But I wasn't really following the Cowboys. I just went to the Cowboys game because I wanted to go to a game. My in-laws at the time were from Massachusetts, and because of that, they liked the New England Patriots. And I found that following the New England Patriots gave me something that I could bond with my father-in-law about. We could talk about the Patriots. We'd have something to talk about, whereas otherwise we really had almost nothing in common. So that's when I started following the Patriots, and I still do. The fact that everybody else hates the Patriots doesn't really matter to me. I don't care. Why would I? And the fact that I no longer have in-laws, so I don't have to bond with my father-in-law anymore, also doesn't matter that much. I've grown attached to it. It's very unusual for someone from Oklahoma to have an attachment to a team in New England, especially since I don't personally have any ties to New England. The only tie I had to New England was indirectly through relatives. I have been to a New England Patriots game. I went to a game in 2005. It was a Monday Night Football game it was at Foxborough, at Gillette Stadium, which had been around for a few years at the time. It was still a relatively new stadium. But the Colts were in town. The Patriots were hosting the Indianapolis Colts. And so I actually got to see Tom Brady and Peyton Manning on the same field. And I mentioned before, the Colts won that game, which was remarkable because the Colts had not won a game against the Patriots for a really long time. The Patriots really had owned that rivalry. Until that Monday night game, I got to go and see the Patriots lose. Circling back to what I mentioned about the number 11, there's another number 11 that I hope will come into play with this trip. There was a number 11 who played for the Patriots and who recently retired. But given that I have an attachment to the number, and given that this player was a great player, I want to see if I can pick up a jersey. I am not intending to get a lot of souvenirs on this trip. I really don't want to spend the money on a lot of souvenirs. Plus, really, when I travel, the only souvenirs I tend to pick up are coffee mugs. I get a lot of coffee mugs because they're usually inexpensive. You can get them, they have like a picture of whatever place that you visited, and they're useful. So, I might pick up a coffee mug or two, but the only real significant souvenir that I intend to pick up is hopefully a number 11 New England Patriots jersey. I'm just outside of Dayton. I wasn't able to get any video of Indianapolis because the construction took me really way around it and there wasn't really anything to see. Also, it's kind of difficult to get good road footage when I have to drive. This would be a lot easier if I had someone here who could, get some video of the scenery while I'm driving. But I'm not going to sacrifice safety to get video. I do want to arrive at my destination alive. If I don't, then you never get to see the video anyway. So hopefully you also want me to arrive at the destination alive. So there's about 3 more hours to go, and I'm tired, but I'm ready for the final push. I've had a chance to rest for a little bit. Topped off the tank, got something to drink, and I've got food, and I'm ready to rock and roll. So next stop, Canton. See you then. Made it. Okay. 4:03. Here we go. All right. Oh, made it. I have arrived in Canton, and I have enshrined myself in my hotel, and I'm ready to shut down for the night. I've got a busy day tomorrow, but I discovered when I got here that I have more people to thank. So to everyone who contributed to the trip, I want to thank each of you. It looks like I need to thank Chris, Michael, Super Robot Punch, Kevin, Eric, and Sign Shop. Thank you so much, you guys. That was amazing. I said if people wanted to contribute gas money to the trip, they could just drop me something on PayPal, and enough of you did that I think I can cover gas essentially all the way to Boston and maybe even part of the way back at this point. I really appreciate it so much. Thank you to everyone who helped. I was the most concerned about this first leg of the journey just because the drive is so long, and I was concerned just about being tired, and I am tired, but not that bad. Yes, it was a lot of drive time, but it was manageable. It's not the most I've ever done, so yeah, it was fine. It was really a pretty smooth drive. I got through St. Louis about as quickly as I've ever gotten through St. Louis. It was really smooth, amazing. And really everything was pretty smooth until I got to Indiana. There was construction around Indianapolis, so I really didn't get very close to it. I didn't get any video of Indianapolis at all because the construction essentially took me right around. And that was kind of a pain and unfortunate. Then I ran into a traffic jam trying to get away from the Indianapolis area. No construction or anything, not rush hour or anything, just a jam. And then I ran into a construction zone between Indianapolis and the Ohio border, and I got to sit at a dead stop for about 15 minutes. All lanes in a dead stop. And so that was not too fun. But then once I crossed the border of Ohio, everything went smoothly again. I got through Columbus, no problem. Got to Canton, no problem. Everything went really smoothly. So good job, Ohio. Well done. And I gotta say, Indiana, what's up with that? It is time to turn in now. There is a very busy day tomorrow. I'm going to take you along. We are going to tour the Pro Football Hall of Fame, see some historical figures and documents and artifacts and such. And then we are going to go on to our nation's capital in Washington, District of Columbia. So please join me then. Now it's time for me to edit and to get some sleep, and I'll see you in the morning.